We have been talking since the new year about testimony and sharing our testimony, how to do that, why we do that. We studied the story of a woman at the well last week and how God sees everything about us and yet still loved us enough to send Christ like Rob just talked about. And our testimony should reflect that. Our testimony should reflect what God has done in our lives. It's not a story about how great we've been. It's a story about how great God has been in our life, the grace and mercy and love that God has shown us. And I'm going to share my testimony with you all today. And so I did not plan on children being in here, but it is not entirely too graphic. So if they want a notepad to play with, or even if your husband wants something like that, there's stuff back there Valerie has. So if I bore you, I'm sorry. I have pictures if that helps you pay attention. My wife is not here because of Xander, and she did not know I was going to do pictures, so this is even great. She's watching at home right now. So you all, every time you see Sarah up on the screen, you go, "Oh," and then when you see me, you go like, "Why'd you age like milk? What is going on with that?" But anyways, one thing that's blown me away is the perfect timing of God in our lives, and how God ordains everything, and it's orchestrated perfectly for Him. And kind of like Rob, the people I've met in my life, the interactions I've had, they were all perfectly lined out where God has led me to today. And so December 12th, 1986, back in the 1900s, I was birthed into the world at 4:19 p.m. in Houston, Texas, at the Women's Hospital in Houston to Carl and Connie Zeddemore. I am named after my dad, but you're going to call me CJ, not Carl. When I was 8, we moved from Texas to Kentucky, and I remember driving through West Tennessee. Now look, I came from southern Texas, flat mostly, trees, man-made hills, that's about it. And as we drove through Tennessee towards South Central Kentucky, I remember looking at my mom and going, "What are all these mountains?" Seeing all the hills. If you've never been, okay, all right, there's no mountains in Central Tennessee, y'all. I grew up playing sports. I played baseball until we moved to Kentucky, and in Kentucky you can't play baseball year-round, so I was like, what am I going to do with my winter months and my fall months? So I picked up football. I played tackle football until my mom realized you're not big enough to play tackle football anymore, and so she drugged me to soccer. And the first middle school soccer practice I went to, we didn't have a middle school team, it was JV for the high school. My mom gets me to the hill where the practice field is down at the bottom, and I'm sitting in the car, refusing to get out of the car as a 7th grade boy. And my mom and I are about the same height at that point, and we're looking eye to eye, and my mom goes, "I'm going to go get the coach and have him come get you." And she did. She did get the coach and have him come get me, and that's the greatest awkward moment I've ever had in my life, because I love soccer. I've coached soccer. My kiddos have played soccer. It's amazing, right? I didn't grow up in church. I didn't grow up in church. We played sports. We were traveling every weekend. I had 3 older sisters who all played fast pitch softball, and in Texas, that's a religion. And so every weekend we were at the softball field. We were camping because there's 5 kids and 2 adults, so you camp because you can't afford hotel rooms for everybody. But when we could afford hotel rooms, my siblings and I, we slept on the floor, and because you can't share a bed, right? And so we would all sneak in, because the hotel would ask how many people were there, and we'd all sneak in and lay on the floor, and it was weird because we weren't staying in hotels, we were staying in motels. And so there were probably a lot of things that I ate that I didn't know about. As we grew up and we played sports, that became our community, right? Those became the people we grew up with. Those became our friends, our best friends. My mom and dad's friends were my friends' parents, and that's great and all, but the only problem is they weren't all Christ-centered people. They weren't all Christ-centered. They weren't terrible people, but they weren't following after Jesus. And as I got into the middle school age and began to discover things myself, that's when life kind of took a left turn. When I was in 6th grade, I was exposed to adult content for the first time. 6th grade, which is the average age for a kid. I was a freshman when 9/11 happened. I remember sitting there in geometry class, having to do geometry because our teacher didn't have not every classroom in the early 2000s had a television. The teacher would still roll in, a substitute would roll in a VHS cart, and you would watch a VHS tape. Those are not DVDs. Those are big tapes that you would put in a VHS. Okay. Anyways, those are coming back around. If you got a VHS player, you need to look how much it's going for on eBay because they're like $200. But I remember sitting in geometry class wanting to watch 9/11, thinking the world's ending, and my geometry teacher, this is why I don't like math teachers, she goes, we're going to do geometry today. And we're all like, we're under attack. But anyways, played sports in high school, played basketball and soccer until I played both of those all throughout. I quit baseball my freshman year, which was my biggest regret because I was okay at baseball. I probably could have played at a small college somewhere, but I didn't like the baseball coach because he was mean to me and hard on me and wanted me to be great, and so I just quit. We're a small school, kind of like Unicoi County, and so every Friday night we would go hang out after football games, and when there weren't football games and basketball games were over on Friday nights, we'd go to parties and we'd travel around and we'd do all these fun things. And I remember as a freshman, one of the guys on the basketball team as a senior, he won Mr. Basketball that year. And in Kentucky, there's no class system, so everybody plays in the same state tournament and things like that. And we traveled around because they wanted him to get recognition, and so we were traveling around playing basketball, and the cheerleaders, this is terrible, the cheerleaders and our basketball team were on the same floor of the hotel rooms that we were traveling around in. If you're a teacher, that's a terrible idea. If you're a coach, that's a horrible idea. Never do that. And so we would party, we would do things that were not godly and led us astray and led to poor decisions. But thankfully, by the grace of God, in 2003, in October of 2003, I met somebody named Sarah. And when she stepped out the front door of her parents' house, it was like a glow. Like she had a halo. Like it was the perfect, you could hear the string music. If it was a movie, there would have been music playing in the background. And I was sitting in the front seat of my friend's car, and I was like, she's kind of hot. I was a junior, she was a sophomore, and I was dating somebody else. So there was a predicament there. But we ended up taking a soccer trip New Year's Eve that year. We went to London, England, not Kentucky. We went to London, England, and Paris, and we spent New Year's there and watched a couple soccer games. And when I came back, this is how much of a ladies' man I was. When I came back, my girlfriend at the time broke up with me. I had purchased her a gift in London, a t-shirt, and the t-shirt said, "Somebody who loves me got me this shirt from London." And so I was such a ladies' man, I was like, I know what I'm going to do. That cute little brunette I've been talking to, I'm going to give this to her, and I'm going to see if that's a good way in. Well, Sarah's not stupid, okay? I didn't learn that women weren't dumb at this point, okay? And I gave Sarah the shirt, and she goes, "Thanks. You didn't buy this for me, did you?" I was like, no. No, I didn't buy it for you. So we started dating later on that spring, in spring of 2004, and this is our first picture together as a couple. Aww. What are you laughing about, Henry? What is that? I'm sunburnt. We're in Destin, Florida. Jeez, Henry. Of all the jokes I've told, that's the one you... Gee. Anyways, not that picture. Hold on. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So we started dating in spring of 2004. That was us at Red Lobster in Destin, Florida, because when you're at the beach, you go to Red Lobster because you can't get that anywhere else. The only time I got to see Sarah for a while was going to church. And so I went to church Wednesdays, I went to church Sundays, and I went to church Sunday night. And I would spend time with her family on Sundays. And her mom was the kids ministry leader at the time, and she organized the VBS later on that summer. And so I was conned into working a VBS. Now look, I had an understanding of who Jesus was. I had an understanding of Christmas and Easter. We had watched the old Ten Commandments movie. I knew all those stories, right? We were kind of CEO Christian. Okay. we were kind of CEO Christians. And so we knew all those things, but I was never really devoted to Christ. I never really had that moment where I surrendered my life to Jesus. And so at this VBS, I get up and my role is this old man who is in a jail cell, and I'm telling these kids about the gospel of Jesus. And so as I'm telling them this story, I'm really telling myself the story of the gospel. I'm really revealing the truth of the gospel to myself. And I remember doing the skit on Sunday morning, and everybody brought their families to church that Sunday, and I'm standing in front of a church full of people, telling them the gospel story, not even confessing Christ as Lord myself, hoping that people would do that themselves. So we move on ahead to fall. School picks back up, and November of 2004, we go to a youth retreat. And the only reason I remember this date is because the Malice in the Palace happened. It's November 19th, 2004. You remember the Malice in the Palace between the Pacers and the Pistons and Ron Artest going up in the stands and beating up an innocent guy? If you've never watched the videos of that, don't. But I remember sitting there Friday night of the conference that weekend, and I'm sitting between Sarah and her mom. Don't know why, but there we are. And the guy preaching, I couldn't tell you what he preached. I couldn't tell you what the band played. I could just feel the Spirit of the Lord leading me. When I walked into the convention center, I could just feel something happening. And as I sat there, I just felt this conviction come over my life. And I felt God telling me to give him everything. I felt like God was saying, come to me, and I have a plan and a purpose for you. I know exactly what I want you to do. And at the end of his message, the only thing I can tell you is he said, if you want to come down front and pray and ask God to change your life, grab somebody next to you. And before he said that, I looked at Sarah and said, will you go with me? And before Sarah said yes, I was already down the aisle. And I remember just being broken in the spirit and crying and just having this big emotional response to a spiritual shift in my life. And from there on, I would love to tell you things were great. That's how I ended up here, right? Let's pray and go on. But it didn't, because I didn't fully give it to the Lord. I didn't fully surrender my life to God. I began to serve in the church. I helped run the sound with Sarah's brother. It was a small church, so Sarah's family did a lot of things there. So I ran the sound with Sarah's brother, and that's where I learned all the tech stuff. And things were growing great. Sarah and I were having a great relationship until my senior year, spring of 2005. You're like, that doesn't seem very long. It was not very long, but it was just long enough for me to do something stupid. I made some boneheaded decisions, and Sarah in her wisdom broke up with me, right? And as a senior, it was right before our 1-year anniversary, and as a senior, I just felt like I was lost. I felt like I had no purpose. Basketball was over. I was just done with school. I was ready to move on and go do whatever else I wanted to do. I had to go to school. I skipped school probably 10 times from the end of basketball in March till May 20th when we graduated. That's a lot. But by the grace of God, I graduated school, and my teacher's going, we're done with you. Your younger brother's coming. We can't handle both of y'all in the same building at one time. So you have graduated. Good luck. I spent more time partying than I ever had before. Spent more time doing dumb things. And instead of taking responsibility for all my actions, I continued to blame everyone else. And looking back at that, I know now that God was trying to get my attention. And I continued to run away. I continued to reject the truth. I continued to see what God was trying to do. Because I was serving in church on Sundays. I was going to church on Sunday nights. I was going to church on Wednesday nights. I was doing all the Christ-like things. I was being a Christian. I was doing the stuff, right? But I hadn't been living a life for Christ. What I was doing was pretending to live a life for Christ to be with Sarah the entire time. And whenever my relationship with Sarah had ended, I had nothing else to fall back on. My identity was my relationship. The first relationship where I really loved someone, and I still love her, obviously, but instead of allowing God to use His Holy Spirit to guide me, I was dating God and I was devoted to Sarah. Instead of being devoted to God and allowing Him to direct how I dated Sarah. And when the dating relationship was gone, my world ended. My relationship with God would begin to deteriorate. My relationship with God began to be non-existent. I was doing all the things. I looked like I was really living out a Christ-like life. But I had no plan. I had no hope for a future. I had nothing going in my life that I wanted to grab onto. I didn't grasp it at the time, but I was living in depression. I was living in anxiety. All things that I brought on by myself. I thought I had no one to turn to, and honestly, if I would have turned to anybody in the church, they probably would have just looked at me and said, pray about it. We'll be praying for you. Good luck, and patted me on the butt and told me to suck it up. That was the type of community we had. And I remember one day I had a panic attack. As an 18-year-old boy who just graduated high school, I wanted to talk to Sarah so bad. And at the time, our only way to communicate, because I was too cheap I couldn't afford a phone, because not everybody had cell phones back then either, kids, like Rod was saying. But so we would talk through MSN Messenger. Y'all remember MSN Messenger, ICQ, those things? That's how Sarah and I built our relationship. And I tried to get onto the computer. This is like the week after I graduated. I tried to get onto the computer and log into MSN, and my parents in their wisdom, who wanted me to get out and do something with my life, they cut the internet off. And I remember they were getting ready to leave to go shop or something, and I sat in the kitchen floor where the computer was in our dining room area, and I threw a temper tantrum. I looked like Zoe and Zaylee and Xander or any other kid that would lay on the floor and kick and scream. As an 18-year-old man, not a boy, as an 18-year-old, I sat in the kitchen. Are you laughing at me again, Henry? I sat in the kitchen, it's funny, and threw a temper tantrum. And they left. They just left me, laying in the kitchen floor throwing a temper tantrum. And this led to me having a panic attack. And the next thing I remember, I woke up in the kitchen floor from where I just caused myself to pass out. I was lost. I had no hope. I had no plan. I had no direction for my life. I had no idea of where I was going to go next. No job. And at the beginning of 2006, I had a job finally. I was working for the YMCA. I was running their sports department, which is probably a horrible hire to hire an 18-year-old kid to run your sports department. And at the beginning of 2006, my oldest sister, who was living in Houston at the time, she called me and she said, CJ, I need your help. And I said, what's up, sis? Well, I haven't talked to you in a few years. We don't have a relationship, but I'll do anything for you, right? It's your sister. And she explained to me that they had found ovarian cancer and she was going to have surgery and they were going to remove everything, and she needed me to come down and help her and her kids because her husband traveled around for work. And being the good big brother I am, I had nothing else going on, and I said, sure, sis, I'll come live with you however long you need me to live down there. No big deal. So I quit my job, told my parents I was leaving. She bought me a plane ticket, and I flew with a suitcase and a backpack down to Houston. I was young, I was dumb, I left. And over the next year, my life fell even further into a living hell. There was more darkness, there was more confusion. Her marriage was awful, diabolical. He was there for a few weeks, then he was gone for a few months. And when he was there, all they did was argue and drink and do stupid stuff. And instead of pushing back against that, instead of trying to get out of there, what was supposed to be just a few weeks led to a few months, almost a whole year. And I was there and I didn't push back. I was just turned 19. I had no way home. I had too much pride to ask my parents. My dad's entire family lived in Houston, and I was too prideful to just ask them to help me get back home. Too prideful to say, I'm in a bad spot and I need help. I got a job. I was working at a preschool at a church, which is fun. It didn't pay a whole lot, but it was something, right? I couldn't raise enough money to get home. And instead of fighting their lifestyle, instead of looking at their lifestyle, I gave into it. Instead of stepping away and saying, I can't do that. And there was one moment that really broke the camel's back. The straw that broke the camel's back. It was about 5 months after living there, and it was a Thursday night. Her husband was in town for a few weeks before he traveled. He was going to be gone for about 6 months. The girls had gone to bed because they had school the next day, and it was about 10 o'clock, and we were sitting in the living room doing our normal things, and, we were being loud and belligerent and stupid, and her husband comes in, and he had rolled a joint. And that's the gateway, right, that leads to destruction. And being already in a bad spot, I took a hit of it. And so we ordered pizza, because that's what you do, right? So we ordered pizza, and as I opened the door to get the pizza from the Domino's delivery guy, this 16-year-old teenager holding my pizza also ended up catching me as I fell out the front door. And I spent that night in the bathroom floor, sick. I woke up the next morning, cleaned myself up, and went to work with a hangover at a preschool. It's a great spot to be in, isn't it? It was the lowest point in my life. And this is actually a picture of me. This is my first picture ever posted on Facebook. But that's me in Texas. Broken, confused. John Chris put out that you're not supposed to post selfies of yourself, so that was long before John Chris. But wearing a Yankees hat, too, in Houston, of all places. But I had no idea what to do. I was broke. I wanted to get home, but I couldn't get home. I was confused. I was the prodigal son with no path back. And I wasn't going to walk. I wasn't going to hitchhike. I was pretty, so something would have happened to me. So I had two options. I either save up money and then hopefully pay off a ticket, for a plane ticket, but couldn't do that. I was making less than minimum wage working at a preschool. Or just hope that God did something. Hope that God sent somebody, and in His perfect timing, He did. A few months later, my mom and dad and brother came to visit my grandparents who were living in Houston, and they wanted me to come see them. And I thought they were just there for Thanksgiving, but they were there to get me. They came down to find me. They came down to rescue me. They came down to help me because I hadn't been talking to them. I hadn't reached back out to them. I ignored their phone calls. I ignored their emails and Facebook messages. And we were there, and I met them at my grandparents' house. And my grandfather at the time, I wish you all could have met him. He was a big guy and gave me a big old bear hug, and his belly was like steel, and I wasn't tall enough to be over his belly, so he crushed my head into his belly and pulls me in, and you just feel like, I love you, stop being a dummy. He didn't have to say anything. Like this big man who had this reputation, he just squeezed me in tight, and I could feel in that embrace that you're being dumb. Make the next right choice. And thankfully, him and Grandma paid for me to fly back to Kentucky. And so within a few days, I accepted that offer. I jumped on an airplane and I got out of Dodge. I left a lot of things back in Texas. I even left a dog, which I made my grandparents find a home for. And I flew back home to Kentucky. And the day I got back to Kentucky was a Wednesday early afternoon. And what do you do on a Wednesday in a small town when there's church on a Wednesday? You go to church, right? And so I go to church. And one of the first people I see is Sarah's oldest brother. He's the youth pastor at the time. His name's Nathan. And he meets me in the parking lot. He gives me this embrace. And he doesn't look at me and point his finger at me. He doesn't berate me for being gone and not talking to them for 10 months. He embraces me and he says, "Hey, Casey and I, which is now his wife, want to take you out to dinner. And so we go to church, and I sit in big church because I'm an adult now. And they take me to the most luxurious place in Glasgow, Kentucky, the McDonald's. They were college students at the time. And it wasn't much, it wasn't fancy, and they don't even remember them taking me to dinner. I've told them this story before, and they don't remember any part about it, but to me it revealed something. And it's something that has kind of shifted my ministry. It's something that has shifted how Sarah and I live our lives, is the fact that a Christ-centered community met me at the door. It wasn't my brother-in-law. It was the arms of Jesus welcoming me back home. It was the prodigal son coming home, and Nathan was that dad. It revealed the importance of that community, of having someone to wrap their arms around you and remind you that God has a plan for your life. God has a plan and a purpose for your life. And so Sarah and I were going to church together, so we became friends. And this is a picture of me the first time we saw of us. Aw, isn't she cute? Look at her. She looks exactly the same. I look sick. But Henry is rolling. I love it. We weren't dating, but we spent some time together as friends. I made dumb decisions in my dating life still, and had a long-distance relationship that was terrible, had a couple of relationships that were terrible, but that enough about me being a dummy. But for the next several months, God began to move in my life. He began to really speak into my life. I started actually studying the Word. I started reading the Word and trying to expose the truth of what God is and who God is and what the plans are for me that God has. Instead of just reading it as another book, I read it as the Word of God and as God speaking to me. I started helping with worship in our youth ministry, a youth ministry that we saw grow to around 100 teens on a Wednesday night. And we met in a building that was very tiny, and somehow we squeezed 100 stinky teenagers into the room. Then there was a pastor change, and the guys on the board decided they were going to have a rotation of men who would speak while they were looking for another pastor in the interim instead of paying an interim pastor. And for some reason, they said, hey, why don't you get up and preach? Why don't you help share the word? I was preaching some on Wednesday nights, and so I was like, how different can adults be from teenagers, right? And so I got up and I preached my first sermon in big church. And if you think you've heard some bad ones, this one was way worse. Be thankful this was a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, because I preached on the baggage we have in our life. And I had up there with me every suitcase I could find, and I kept picking them up as I was preaching. It was awful. And I was picking them all up, and I was scrawnier than I am now. I'm still kind of scrawny, but I was holding them like this as I preached, and I got done, and I prayed, and I set them down. I was like, whew, that's like 35 minutes. It was 15 at the most, maybe 10. But God was faithful. Through my horrible preaching, through my horrible obedience, God was faithful. And so Sarah and I started hanging out a little more, and we never really made it official, Facebook official after that. I looked at her one day and I was like, let's just get married. That's not how the story went. I'm not going to tell you the engagement story because she hates it, but we ended up getting engaged, and this is us the winter after we got engaged. Aww, that's me with hair. Before 3 kids. So in October of 2010, we got engaged. And then we got married in December of 2011, and this is us. I just want to show y'all pictures of her. Isn't she awesome? Look at her. That's December 17th, 2011. We hoped for snow, and just like today, we didn't get it. We were enjoying being married, right? We didn't have any kids. We were having fun. We bought our first house. We didn't have any appliances in our first house. We were still taking our laundry to her parents to do our laundry. We didn't have a stove. We used a griddle on our countertops to cook hamburgers one day. And in our naivete, we didn't think about it and got grease all over the floor of the kitchen. Ended up slipping and falling and just laughing the whole time as we almost tried to burn down our house. And we were enjoying life. We were taking trips. We were working, trying to establish our family. Then we had some church drama, and we were asked to step down from our position, which we won't get into that. It was dumb. But God used that because if we wouldn't have had that, we probably would still be at that church and not where God has led us to today. Through Him shoving us out the door, He stepped us on the path He needed us to be. A few years later, we got our first bivocational job. And this is a picture of us at the Methodist Church. It's a grainy picture. That's what pictures used to look like. That's our first day at the Methodist Church. And even there, God did something. Even at the Methodist Church, God still used us to do something. He grew our youth ministry.